The slides you are about to see are mainly documentary and of uneven quality, for which I apologize in advance. Eliestoun is the most prominent feature of our bluffland, particularly when you fly over it. Now, this picture is a 1965 shot showing Eliestoun, the water tower, and as you can see, a good many of the original plantings, many of which are now gone. Eliestoun is very noticeable from the base of the statue over in Portage. Although the telephoto plays tricks on us, from Portage you can see Eliestoun is very prominent. Even with full foliage, you can see that the bluffs only come halfway up to Eliestoun, thus illustrating how high it is up on the upland. In 1965, Elsa had a direct entry onto the river road from Mill Street, and you can see the front hill going up to the side. Our earliest picture of Elsa dates from 1873, showing the waterfront and in the distance what's called Mount Radiance. Our earliest surviving map of Elsa shows the houses that were standing in 1861. Here's a detail of that map showing the bluffs on either side of the entrance to Elsa. Now here is Elsa Township from 1862 showing vegetation. Eliestoun, I believe, was to be built later in the lower right corner. Now we are in the 1872 atlas. Susan Ellis owned the land where Eliestoun was going to be built, and you'll notice the pattern of orchards there. And E.M. Fuller had a farmhouse where the chapel would later be built on our campus. Now we jump all the way up to about 1910, and in the upper left we have the word mansion, meaning Notchcliffe, Mrs. Ames' house, and over on the right we have Eliestoun listed as the mansion with its outbuildings. So we have both the Ames and the Turner estates. In the 1872 atlas, there is a lithograph of Notchcliffe, Mrs. Ames' house, where the Turner wedding was to be held in 1885. When we lost the J. Wilkinson Elliott landscape map, fortunately, about a year later, this map turned up in the biology department, done by a surveyor named Pitzman from St. Louis, showing the road and the trees at Eliestoun all numbered. And when you get up close to this map, which by the way is down in the Principia archives, we see the pagoda, for instance, that disguised the well, which was, as I said earlier, about 150 yards north of the house. Here's a detail of the house and the road showing the trees all numbered. In 1889, A.W. Longfellow won the competition to design the large Carnegie Institute in Pittsburgh, and from that came several commissions, including here the Bogs House, which is now a social agency. This was built the very same year as Eliestoun and shows how many different materials and styles Longfellow could work in. The front of the Bogs House looks almost medieval. The Bogs House is obviously a townhouse looking out over a city park in Pittsburgh. The entry hall of the Bogs House, being more formal than Eliestoun, has stonework in it, but it has details such as a rosette in the mantel that remind one of the details of the Eliestoun mantel in the library. The Bogs House stairway is much more formal than Eliestoun, coming down in a gentle curve with neo-colonial woodwork. ending in a formal newel post. This is the newel post of the Bogs House, and as you look at details of the mantel, you see that the brackets that support it are very similar to the brackets that support the Eliestoun mantels. The Turners lived a rather isolated life at Eliestoun. Here's one of their carriages in 1895, probably driven by the Bechtold brothers, and the Blythes managed to get up to Eliestoun by car. Mrs. Cunningham told me they allowed 3 hours to drive up to Eliestoun in the 20s because they always got stuck in the mud. The Blythes made a major improvement in the 20s. Down below Eliestoun, over to the left of the porch, they put in a Japanese garden, brought a man down from Chicago to do that. Among the pictures that I received from Avery Library was this gate lodge in Dedham, Massachusetts by Longfellow, Alden, and Harlow at the Nickerson Estate, and you'll note the tower is very similar to the tower at Eliestoun. And here is the evolution, you might say, of the Eliestoun Tower. Here's the way it looked in 1966 when it was painted green. Then came a student crew with a color picked by Glenn Felch in 1976, and then finally the most recent restoration of what we believe is very close to the original color by Jamie Bollinger with a new roof in 1990. Longfellow took ideas from his other houses. Here is a dormer window with a hip roof on a house in Cambridge done about 1894, and here is a similar dormer on Eliestoun with what was the concrete asbestos roof of Henry Turner that's now been taken off. Here again we have a borrowing. This is an octagonal dormer window at 6 Channing Place in Cambridge by Longfellow in 1894. Eliestoun has an octagonal dormer. This is the way it looked in the 1976 renovation. And here is the way that dormer turned out in the 1990 renovation with the new roof. There are other dormers at Eliestoun on the servants' wing going back over the kitchen. Among the papers from Avery Library showing Longfellow and Alden Harlow houses was this immense house at Pride's Crossing, Massachusetts, which might remind one faintly of Eliestoun, especially if you look in the lower right corner at the floor plan, which is basically Eliestoun's floor plan turned the other way. Now, if you look at Eliestoun, you'll just see the veranda goes the opposite of the Pride's Crossing house. But other than that, basically, they're the same. And Pride's Crossing, of course, is a town with cliffs overlooking the ocean. Nearly all of these interiors that are not documentary pictures were taken in 1966 when Eliestoun was a residence for single staff women, and that may explain furnishings that you're not used to seeing. In the shingle-style house, ordinarily there was no living room. You came into what was called a living hall, and that is what Eliestoun has. The Eliestoun Hall also has what is called an inglenook, or a built-in settee. There are a number of these around the house. Here, for example, is an inglenook at the Bogs House in Pittsburgh. Here's the living hall in 1895 in the Turner period, showing how they furnished it, and you'll notice there were spindles that formed a sort of divider wall that have been taken out. One of the least changed rooms at Eliestoun is the library with its built-in shelves. Here is the way the library appeared in the Turner period, about 1895, and we're fortunate to have the same view taken in the 1920s during the Blythe occupancy. The Turners took a picture of the living hall looking the other way toward the fireplace, which, by the way, was closed up by Principia in the 1930s. And here is Mrs. Blythe reading in front of that fireplace with her dog somewhere in the 1920s. We're looking from the living hall in 1966 over into the library. Now, the dining room in the Blythe period had furniture left over from the Turners, and by the way, the walls, which appear very dark, are redwood. Then Principia painted the dining room, and here it is in 1966 with its built-in cupboard with its original hardware. And they did this in other houses. Here's a built-in cupboard in the Bogs House in Pittsburgh. The room above the dining room in 1895 was Mrs. Turner's bedroom. This, believe it or not, is her decorative scheme and the original ceramic mantle, which unfortunately was thrown out when Principia redid the house. Large upstairs bathroom with the oriel window was Mrs. Turner's dressing room. So we have here a picture taken from her bedroom looking into that dressing room through a doorway that's no longer there. One of our earliest pictures of Eliestoun shows the house from the east side without any significant plantings, and little Julia Marion is sitting on a stump in the foreground, and you can see the shingle roof. Our early pictures from the 1890s show a porch over the main entrance, but of course Principia put a bathroom in the 1930s up on that porch. As I said, in 1974 we brought the Blythe sisters out to walk around the house. This is Jean Blythe and her sister Mary Cunningham standing by the dining room wall on the east side of the house. In the 1960s, the house was painted green and then gradually faded a very light color. This is the oriel window on the dressing room, now bathroom. In 1976, a student crew working with a color selected by Glenn Felch repainted the house, and here's the oriel at the end of that work. It's fun to watch the evolution of the house from the south or river side. We have here, although it's indistinct, what may be the oldest picture of Eliestoun, because in Henry Turner's bedroom in the middle of the second floor there is clear evidence of a balcony that is no longer there. It must have been filled in within a very few years, and I suspect the reason it was filled in, it must have caught a great deal of rainwater and snow since the prevailing winds come from that direction. Now, the south side of the house, taken in the 1960s, shows the way the house looked even when it was the home of Principia's president. It had a screened-in porch where they had the Strawberry Festival for seniors at graduation. The 1976 repainting produced this effect on the south side of the house with the screens off. And the 1990 renovation of the house with a slightly different color produced this effect on the porch. Here again is the effect of the 1990 repainting and re-roofing on the veranda or porch. And this is the 1976 renovation of the tower. It's interesting to follow the evolution of the west elevation of the house. Our earliest view, taken in the middle 1890s, shows the house with the unpainted shingles, and you will note that the tower is shorter and had no third-story window. Near the end of the Turner occupancy, probably around 1918, the house had acquired a dark, we found out later, dark green color, and they had ivy growing on the porch. In 1966, with the same view, we have the faded green color and the screened-in veranda. By 1976, the screens were gone and the new color had been put on by that student crew. And then in 1990, a very careful effort was made to return it to the 1918 color. In the 1890s, we have a few pictures of the life of the Turners. Here is Margot, the French tutor, with young Julia Marion. And apparently, Julia Marion, about that time, had a dollhouse and a lot of things that she spread all over the lawn. Her father is sitting and watching this process. On the veranda in the late 1890s, we see Henry Turner and Julia Marion and Edgar Turner. Remember, this is a man who had inherited a life income of $10,000 a year when he turned 21. Here are the three of them again at a different angle on the veranda. Nearly all of our pictures, by the way, of this family show them sitting down rather than doing anything terribly strenuous. Here's Marion as a little girl on the veranda looking out. And this picture was taken in 1912, just before she married J.D. Worcester Lambert. The Turner dining room, taken in the late 90s, around 1912, shows Marion Turner sitting back from the table and her aunt Mary Cushman with her elbow on the table. And the Blythe ladies said that there was a golf course at Eliestoun, which I've not found evidence for, but here's photographic evidence that there probably was a tennis court somewhere over on the grounds. Some of you may be curious about the little building on the entrance road with the Gothic windows. I asked Even Righteous about this, and she said it was Henry Turner's office where he paid his workers, and he went out there and slept a lot. So think of Henry Turner when you pass that. The Ames plot in Bellefontaine Cemetery has Mrs. Ames, Mrs. Cushman, and the Turners in the front row. Here's a close-up of the Turner tombs in that Ames plot, and we also have Mrs. Ames' tomb in the back row, and standing by itself with an urn is the tomb of her father, General James Semple, the founder of ELSA. That tomb, unfortunately, looks different today because a windstorm knocked the vase off. In 1973, Glenn Felch, new to the Principia faculty, painted a mural of Elsa and environs in our front hall. And there was one section of wall that he just wasn't sure what to do with, and I pleaded for a picture of Eliestoun. So here are two versions of that picture done in acrylic on canvas. First Eliestoun from a distance, and then Eliestoun a little closer up. Rather dramatic as a finale. Let's add a few Eliestoun footnotes. First, where did the name come from? Mrs. Ames, Mrs. Turner's mother, had a book of the genealogy of the Semple family, which, by the way, is now in the Principia Library. And the Semple family came from a county in Scotland called Renfrewshire. It's got a different name today. And they lived near a body of water called Castle Semple Loch, L-O-C-H. At one end of that loch, there was a ruin called Eliestoun Tower, E-L-L-I-E-S-T-O-U-N. And a number of people in that genealogy are described as being of the Eliestoun line. So evidently, there was a serious thought of a castle in building the house. Mrs. Allen told me in her letter that her father because of his farm animals and whatnot, was proud of being able to withstand a siege of no matter what length. This adds further fuel to the idea that they saw it as a castle. Second footnote. Henry Cushman, Mrs. Ames' grandson, and one of his cousins got up in the attic one day off the top landing of the stairway, found the lead tank of water which had no cover, and went swimming. And according to the Blythe ladies, Mrs. Ames, when she found out that her grandsons had done this, ordered the servants to empty the tank, and then the boys spent the better part of a day down in the pantry working the hand pump to refill the lead tank. Third footnote. Elliston, when it was purchased by Principia, became a residence for various staff members, and one of the first people to live at Elliston was Bernard Maybeck, who came out to help site the buildings on the campus, and on occasion he walked from Elliston all the way over to the campus. By the middle 1930s, it had become the President's House, and Frederick Morgan lived at Elliston during the years that I was a student, and they had the Strawberry Festival for graduating seniors on the screen porch at Elliston. In the early 1960s, it became a residence for single-staff women, and then gradually shifted over to its present use as a small dormitory with a faculty couple.